This is Amy Betro. Once bored in the suburbs of Wisconsin, she somehow decided that her next career move would be international assassin. But with zero training, no common sense, and internet comments about her like this, let's just say that things did not exactly go to plan. Instead of a glamorous life of crime, Amy racked up one disaster after another, trading away her freedom for absolutely nothing. And so today, we're diving into a story that is so bizarre it feels like satire. That being the tale of a wannabe hitwoman, Amy Betro, and how her fall from grace really wasn't a fall at all. In fact, it was more like a clumsy faceplant into the mud. Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today I have a wild story for you. I have to say, I am genuinely excited to share this story, and so on that note, let's skip all the formalities. Please subscribe and get comfortable and enjoy this crazy story. This is the case of Amy Betro. Welcome to Birmingham, England, folks. Now, having lived here myself, I can tell you a thing or two about the place, and, well, let's just say it isn't exactly the top of my favourites list. Sure, it's a busy city in the heart of the Midlands, known for its industrial heritage, diversity, and busy streets. But beyond the shopping centres and the old canals, Birmingham has a side that's, well, grotty, tired, and, if I'm being honest, a little dull. But still, it was here in the late 2010s that a quiet tension began to build between two families. And by the way, you'll have to bear with me here, as there is a little bit of family lore going on before we can get to the main bulk of the story. Now, on one side of this divide was Mohammed Aslam and his son Mohammed Nabil Nazir. The two of them lived over with the rest of their family in Derbyshire, but they would routinely come to Birmingham for its deep Pakistani British community. Moving forward, we're going to refer to the two of them as Aslam and Nazir. But Aslam, who was almost 60 years old at the time, was a well-respected elder within his family, known as a hard-working and proud man who immigrated to England decades earlier. He had built a life here, raised his children, and by the year 2018, had probably figured that his stormy years were now likely behind him. Meanwhile, his son Nazir, who was around 30, was a man caught between two worlds. One rooted in his parents' traditions, and the other in modern Britain. He was tech-savvy, confident, multicultural, and loyal to his family. Speaking of that, Nazir really did look up to his father, and that admiration was mutual. They would often travel together into Birmingham, not only for social but business events too. And up until this point in time, life of the family was, well, pretty ordinary. As far as we can tell, they had never gotten in trouble with the police before. It's not like they were hardened criminals or anything like that. Just, quite literally, a normal family. However, it was during one of their trips to a nearby clothing shop in Birmingham that their paths would take an unexpected turn forever, as this trip would light the fuse on a rivalry that would spiral into violence, deception, and ultimately drag in one of the most unlikely accomplices imaginable from half a world away. It was on a hot summer's day in July of 2018 when Aslam and Nazir walked into a boutique clothing store which was owned by a local man named Aslat Muhammad. Now, Aslat was another family man who, of course, owned the store, and whether by coincidence or fate, was just about to become their next arch-nemesis. Now, at the time, Aslam and Nazir were looking for a wedding dress for one of their family members, and when they found the dress they wanted in Muhammad's store, they were hoping that he would maybe renegotiate the price. The thing is, not only did Muhammad think the price was fair, but he was also not willing to go any lower, and so his answer was basically absolutely not. And let's just say that that blunt response was, well, not taken very politely. I don't need to tell you this, but sometimes haggling can come across as quite rude, and what followed was an argument that very quickly got out of hand. Harsh words were exchanged, and before you knew it, things got physical. And before anyone could calm down, the argument turned less buy one get one free and more 2-for-1 punches. Clothes were knocked off of their racks, onlookers were absolutely shocked at what was going on, and blood was even drawn. And well, let's just say that it was quite obvious who won the fight here, because both Aslam and Nazir were badly injured and bruised afterwards. However, it was Nazir's father, Aslam, who unfortunately experienced the brunt of it. In fact, his head injury was so bad that it would forever affect his cognitive thinking. His injury changed his life overnight, and it's a stern reminder that health is quite literally everything, and you really can't gamble with it. Which got me thinking about how important it is to find the right doctor for yourself. Because the truth is that while one doctor might be great for me, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll be the right fit for you. I think it was around 2 years ago, but back in London, I remember meeting this doctor, and honestly, he changed the entire experience for me. He actually spoke to me like I was his friend, like he had my back, and he had this weird, dry sense of humor which made the entire thing so much funnier. For the first time ever, it felt like a doctor was actually listening to me. And you know the crazy thing about all of this is he actually was. The previous 2 doctors put my symptoms down to, I think it was some sort of strange stomach bug. But he realized that I had an underlying infection, one that needed antibiotics, and within a few days I was feeling so much better. And I have to say, that is what really stood out to me when today's sponsor ZocDoc reached out, because health really does matter. ZocDoc is a free website that helps you find someone who isn't merely available, but a doctor that actually feels right for you. And the great thing is that it takes all of the guesswork out of your appointments. Whether you're looking for convenience, filtering by specialty, or simply want the top-rated doctor, you're in good hands. Within seconds, you can search and compare a network doctors and find the one who fits you best. And even better, you can actually see their real appointment openings and book instantly. That means no more endless calls or awkward holding times. Most visits happen within 24 to 72 hours or even on the same day. Oh, and by the way, ZocDoc has more than 100,000 providers across nearly every specialty, including mental health, dental, skincare, eye care, and much, much more. It's basically a one-stop shop for your health, and it's completely free to use. So, stop putting off those doctor's appointments and, well, I tell you this in every outro already, but take care of yourself. Go to ZocDoc.com/coffeehousecrime to find and instantly book a top-rated in-network doctor today. You can also find the link in the description. Back to our story today, Aslam had suffered a serious head injury with his fight with Muhammad, and it turns out that Nazir wasn't in the best shape either. It really does sound like both father and son had lost the fight. Unfortunately, the violence didn't stop at the store either. As the news spread among proud relatives and friends, the windows of Aslam and Nazir's family home were shattered. And although it's unclear who was responsible, it looked like associates of Muhammad had retaliated after his shop had taken a beating. What had begun as a disagreement over a wedding dress had now become a red-hot rivalry fueled by pride and pain. And it was clear from the outset that neither family were willing to back down. Locals gossiped in the aftermath, and there was talk about how Aslam, who was once sharp-minded, was now struggling with both memory and concentration. Every day after that, Nazir watched his father suffer, and the injustice of it all seemed to weigh heavily on him. And although he would go on to make some very stupid decisions, you can see why he was angry to say the least. But on the other side of the fence, Aslat's family felt that they had simply defended themselves and of course the business. It's clear that neither family were willing to accept their own share of the blame. And now, all that was left was bitter resentment, and of course the refusal to let go and move on. Fast forward to July of 2019 and an entire year had passed. But despite this, Aslam and Nazir were still furious. In fact, the two still desperately wanted payback. So, what could possibly satisfy their outrage? Well, in their minds, apologies were out of the question. Not only had too much blood been drawn, but it had been more than a year now. They wanted to do something a little more serious. And as for suing or pressing charges, well, that didn't seem to get them any resolution either. So, it was in that moment that they decided to take matters into their own hands. You probably know where I'm going with this already, but they decided that they wanted revenge in the darkest way possible. Muhammad had to die, or at the very least, one of his family members. Now, I think it's kind of obvious to say this, but revenge is never the way to solve anything, especially when it involves someone's life. Not only is it unjust, but Aslam and Nazir would also risk their own lives in prison. However, put quite simply, they really didn't care. It seems that both violence and thuggery were the absolute limit of their abilities, which, to be fair, had taken a hit in the recent years. And so, of course, the next challenge was trying to find a way of striking without getting caught. And, well, let's just say that that was found in a very unusual way. It was around this time that Nazir did what many would do when they're bored, lonely, or simply plotting revenge. And that's opening up a dating app. And through the countless selfies and filtered smiles, he found a woman named Amy Betrow. Now, at the time, Amy was 40 years old, and she lived in a place called West Allis in Wisconsin, a place that is better known for its cheese curds over its contract killers. Formerly a pet sitter, a graphic designer, and a volunteer for the council, she wanted to move on to new things. You can also see through her LinkedIn that she loves music, graphic design, and wanted to move away from Wisconsin. By every definition, she was completely ordinary. In fact, the police would later call her unexceptional, which really is just a polite way of saying that she wasn't interesting, clever, or even remotely suited to international crime. She had no criminal record, no money, no training, no fitness regime, absolutely nothing. However, Nazir saw potential in her, and so, through many late nights and countless text messages and video calls, he gave her all of the affection and charm she could handle. And Amy, who was both smitten and completely flattered, fell for all of it. In hindsight, she probably was desperate for something exciting, and I'm really not sure what she saw in him either. But it worked. To her, this young British man was out of the ordinary, and a world far, far away from Milwaukee. And so, soon enough, and a matter of only weeks later, she was on a plane to the UK. For the next month and a half, Amy played tourist while holding his hand through the many streets of Derby, London, and more. To her, this clearly was romance. But to him, well, it was recruitment. Surprise, surprise, but it turns out that Nazir actually had an agenda. And over dinners and pillow talk, he created an emotional story of family honor and how his beloved father was almost beaten to death by the world's most violent salesman. He painted Aslat as a villain and described himself as a respectful son who was merely seeking justice against a man who had left his father disabled. And bless her, but Amy, she actually believed it. What initially started as sympathy would soon become something far darker, and this is where Nazir's plan would finally come into motion. At some point along their relationship, Nazir asked Amy a question that no partner should ever ask. And of course, I'm talking about asking her to help him find revenge. So, going from online girlfriend to international assassin was far beyond Amy's intentions or even skill set. But to Nazir, her outsider status was perfect. Now, Nazir believed that since Amy had no history with Birmingham or Muhammad and was rarely in the country, she could quite literally appear, pull the trigger, and then disappear back to America. Which, yeah, was clean and simple in theory. And with Amy severely lacking any common sense and also being blinded by infatuation, she didn't see any issue or problem with it either. And so, with that in mind, Amy was all in. And let's just say that love can make you very, very stupid. But I think in Amy's case, she was kind of half there already. And so, with that said, the plan was now finally set. Aslam and Nazir would fly Amy back to Britain, and she would then carry out the hit on Aslat or his family. It is worth noting here that she was authorized to take out any one of his close relatives instead. The idea was cold, calculated, and extremely petty. To be honest, that's perfectly suited for our two cronies here, who had essentially outsourced their family grudge to a lovesick American. Now, the idea of a mild-mannered Midwestern woman now transforming into a globe-trotting assassin definitely does sound like the plot to a bargain bin action movie. Yet, somehow, Amy was convinced that she was up for the task. I think if you were to find her advertisement online, her motto would probably be, no training, no experience, and no clue. But plenty of misplaced confidence. Oh yeah, and she also seemed to think that throwing on the niqab would somehow make her invisible, or that pulling a trigger was just as easy as playing Call of Duty. It's the kind of logic that only a very gullible mind would believe. Red flags in the story were absolutely everywhere, and common sense should have been screaming at her to run. However, instead, she decided to double down. and what followed was the most amateur professional hit you will ever come across. In August of 2019, Amy officially began her journey from Wisconsin to England. Back at home, she told her friends and family that she was taking a trip to celebrate her upcoming 40th birthday, and alongside her partner, she may attend a party in England. On August the 22nd, and for the next 2 weeks, she traveled around the country like a tourist while secretly preparing for murder. She would even post many photos of herself on social media, usually in front of British landmarks like the London Eye. But underneath that facade, she was actually coordinating with both Nazir and Aslam, gathering all of the tools and information she required to get the job done. It was during that time that she purchased 2 burner phones with cash, before then giving one to Nazir and Aslam and keeping the other for herself. Meanwhile, they spared no effort in setting up their plan for her, including illegally acquiring a semi-automatic pistol off of the black market. And then, on September the 4th, only a few days before the planned attack, Amy and Nazir met up near the city of Derby. In a secluded area of wasteland near the A38 highway, they then tested the gun. A short video found on Nazir's phone showed them firing the gun into the ground, of course making sure that it actually worked. Ironically, the footage showed the weapon jamming during this test. It was kind of like a warning sign that this gun was actually unreliable, but careless as always, they both brushed it off. On September the 6th, Amy then contacted Muhammad under the pretense of wanting to buy his car, which is something that he actually found quite strange because he never included his number on the listing. In hindsight, he really should have asked how she found his number, but as you can tell, he never did. And during the time that the two were messaging each other, she then booked herself into the Rotunda Hotel, which can be found in Birmingham's city centre. As the day of the attack grew closer, Amy arranged a getaway vehicle, going to a local car dealer and purchasing an old Mercedes E240. And get this, but to avoid connecting the car to her real identity, Amy used a fake name, Becky Booth, which sounds almost comical, kind of like a name from a bad spy movie. To make matters even worse, she showed up to buy the car in a summer dress, a hoodie and flip-flops, which is basically the weirdest and most memorable combination you can think of. Anyway, Becky Booth's big beautiful blunder was now finally ready to go. She had her weapon, an escape plan, and even a fake identity to go with it. Everything was falling into place here. At least in her mind anyway. However, as you're just about to find out, things didn't just go wrong for Amy, it went nuclear. September the 7th, 2019. It was a Saturday evening in the quiet suburb of Yardley, and Becky and co had decided to target either Muhammad or his son Sikander. Aslam and Nazir did not leave it all to chance, instead making the decision to physically come to Birmingham to assist in Amy's operation, and in their red Volvo acted as lookouts as they drove behind her Mercedes. By the way, I am pretty sure this basically defeats the entire purpose of an unrelated assassin. Now wearing a black niqab, Amy's identity was very well hidden, and for the next 45 minutes, she sat parked on Muhammad's street. So, here is where one other crucial blunder was made. At 8:10 PM, Sikander Ali finally arrived home, with his black SUV pulling into the cul-de-sac. It is true that Amy did have permission to take him out, but she actually believed that Sikander was Muhammad. And so, this was it. It was finally time for Becky Booth to shine. Unaware of any danger outside, he parked his car in front of the family home before then stepping out of his vehicle. That is when Amy jumped out of her own car, dressed head to toe in black and with a gun in her hand. And after raising the pistol merely a few meters away from Sikander, she squeezed the trigger. However, this is where their plan immediately fell apart, because after pulling that trigger, well, nothing happened. Yet again, the gun had jammed, and by now, Sikander was sharp enough to realize what was going on, and had actually taken this moment to jump back into his car. For an eternal split second, both of them seemed to be frozen in shock, with Sikander behind the driver's wheel, and Amy just stood there like an absolute pillock. The truth is that Amy's problem was actually quite simple to fix. However, she didn't know what to do. Instead, she seemed to just keep trying to pull the trigger, expecting different results. And Sikander, well, he was already on plan B. By now, he had turned the key and slammed the car into reverse. Meanwhile, Amy was just fumbling with her pistol, and thankfully, it was too late for her to do anything about it, because by now, Sikander was halfway across the street. In the chaos, he slammed into the door of Amy's Mercedes, bending it in the process. And not only was this good for tying her vehicle to the crime scene, but it also made it quite hard for her to get away, and Sikander then sped away into the darkness, narrowly escaping his assassination. In the seconds after his disappearance, Amy just stood there with her pistol in her hand, undoubtedly in a mix of both rage, alarm, and absolute confusion. Her perfect plan had seemed to fail spectacularly, and now she was past the point of return. But Agent Becky Booth was not about to quit yet, and so she jumped back into her car and abandoned it down a side road nearby before then fleeing on foot. She then called a taxi before giving away her phone number, location, and even where she was going, that being back to the rotunda. And you can actually tell only moments later that she realized this was a bad idea, before then changing her destination to Moore Street.
Hello, can I get a taxi?
Where from?
I'm on Austin Close.
Okay, and where are you going?
To the rotunda.
To where, sorry?
The rotunda, to the Birmingham, to Moore Street.
Could I get your name?
Becky.
Back at the hotel, Amy then swapped her niqab for a pair of loud patterned trousers and some steel toe-capped work shoes. If police were on the lookout for a veiled woman, well, now she looked nothing like their suspect. After that, she then pulled out her burner phone and sent a message to Muhammad, simply saying, "Where are you hiding?" When he didn't respond, she then sent him a follow-up by saying, "Stop playing hide and seek. You're lucky the gun jammed." Unsurprisingly, he didn't reply to that one either. A couple of hours later, and at 12:18 AM, she then called for another taxi. And while still using her American accent, she then stupidly gave the dispatcher Muhammad's and Sikander's address. Back at the property, Amy then tried to finish what she had started. However, yet again, it was amateur hour. She fired a handful of shots through the front windows of the property, before then running away. Thankfully, no one was hurt, and that's because by now the house was entirely empty. Now, having vented her fury, Amy disposed of the burner phone, hoping it would never be found, and in her mind, that tied up all loose ends. But in reality, she had already signed her fate away. By the morning, that quiet street was now crawling with officers. Crime scene tape was surrounding the property, and the family had to be escorted to a secure location. The attempted assassination of Muhammad left both him and his entire family shaken, and with no other enemies outside of Nazir and Aslam, it was kind of obvious who had targeted them. And so, quite naturally, they were immediately considered to be persons of interest. However, linking them to the crime scene with actual evidence was going to take a while, and so officers began the painstaking process. Shortly after sunrise, police officers would discover the abandoned Mercedes only a short distance away from the property, with its driver's door still dented from where Sikander had escaped. Interestingly enough, but inside that vehicle, forensic teams found a black glove which held DNA, and although the DNA did not match any criminal databases, they could run it against any future suspects. In addition to this, surveillance cameras in the area were analysed, and like many urban areas, Yardley had a huge system of security cameras on homes and street corners. And of course, it wouldn't take long until officers found this surveillance footage. And another surveillance camera caught the same Mercedes tailing a red Volvo in that neighborhood only the day prior. All the police had to do was run the license plate through their database, and that is when they realized that it was registered to Muhammad Aslam of Derbyshire. Soon enough, Aslam and Nazir found officers knocking on their front door. They were then questioned, and their property was thoroughly searched. No surprise, they claimed that they were innocent, had no idea what was going on, and also that they were at home all night. Meanwhile, and unknown to officers, Amy was actually already weaseling her own way out of the country, and on September the 9th, which was only a day after the shooting, She fled the UK, catching a flight from Manchester to Chicago. Within a day, she was back on US soil, and she probably thought that she'd gotten away with it too. Shortly after, and true to their pact that they had promised each other, Mohammed Nazir then left the UK and flew to America to join Amy, once again tying both of them together in the crime.
However, if you think the story ends here, then you might want to think again, because the truth is, the drama was only getting started. Although British police had surveillance footage of Amy in Birmingham, they actually had no idea who she was. Saying that, what they did notice was that Nazir was constantly contacting an American phone number. And when they decided to pull data from his phone, that is when they struck gold, because what they uncovered was a video of him and Amy test firing a gun only days before the attack. And that was only the beginning, because back in the US, both Amy and Nazir had decided to double down on their stupid ideas. You see, with Nazir being so violent, it is no surprise to learn that he had many enemies back in the UK. The problem is, his arch-nemesis was now suspecting him of trying to assassinate him. And so, what better way than to try to frame another one of his rivals? So, it was in that moment that he and Amy decided that they would actually mail illegal ammunition to one of his rivals' homes. He would even contact the police anonymously to tip them off. And for a brief while, it actually worked. However, that small victory would not last very long, because soon enough investigators realized that this poor man had no motive whatsoever. It was because of that they decided to dig a little deeper. And what they found was actually game over for Amy and Nazir.
When detectives examined the seized ammunition, they discovered something very interesting. The DNA found on the ammo actually matched the same DNA on the glove left inside the abandoned Mercedes. Suddenly, the two plots seemed to be linked to the very same person. After tracing the package back across the Atlantic, they realized it had a time, a date, and even the post office it was sent from. And so, after contacting the American authorities in Palatine, Illinois, they went to check the cameras. And that is when they realized that they had surveillance footage of Tweedledee and Tweedledum in the act. Despite trying to disguise themselves, they made, yet again, another crucial mistake. They may have used a fake name, but the payment records told a different story. And so, just like that, the name behind all of this finally came into focus. Authorities now knew that Becky Booth was in fact Amy Betrow. By the year 2020, Amy was now firmly on police radars, and the British Crown Prosecution Service was building a case against her. It seems that somehow she knew about it too, and sensing the heat, she decided to take drastic action and flee the United States. Alone, by the way. Becky Booth's next mission was to try and find a hideout that was far away and in a place where the British authorities could not easily find her. So, in our recent case of Thomas Campbell, we talked about how his killer made the smart decision to flee to Suriname, which then meant that he managed to stay well hidden for quite a long time. Well, Amy's choice was not so intelligent, unsurprisingly. However, it would also work in her favour for quite the long period. Back in the UK, things were not looking good for Nazir or Aslam. Both of them were arrested on several charges, and in late 2024, their trials began at Birmingham Crown Court. They were under the hammer for the conspiracy to murder Aslat Muhammad, the attempted murder of Sikandar Ali, and several other firearms offences. The evidence against them was absolutely overwhelming. Nazir, who by then was 31 years old, and Aslam, who was 58, both denied any wrongdoing. But quite obviously, the jury would see right through them, and as a result, they were both found to be guilty. Both of them were handed very hefty sentences. Mohammed Nazir was convicted of conspiracy to murder, possession of a firearm with intent to cause fear of violence, perverting the course of justice, and illegally importing firearms. And so, for all of that, he received 32 years behind bars. Meanwhile, his father, Mohammed Aslam, was found guilty of conspiracy to murder, and so was also sentenced to 10 years in prison.
The crazy part is that by the time Aslam and Nazir had actually been convicted, Amy had been on the run for more than 4 years. And despite so much time passing, she was still actually successfully evading the police. Maybe she believed that she truly had escaped her consequences forever, but the truth is that investigators never actually stopped looking for her, and in 2024, they issued an international warrant for her arrest. Even the FBI and Interpol were involved, But the insane twist to all of this is that the surprising break would not come from an agent or a detective, but actually from a journalist. You know, I think it's every true crime YouTuber's dream to help solve a case, and this journalist actually managed to do that. So hats off to you, whoever you are. So, how precisely was Amy discovered? Well, as it turns out, she was actually posting dozens of photos of herself on Instagram. And although she was trying to be discreet with her location, the journalist actually found that out based off the position of the sun in her photos, which I have to say is absolutely genius.
After discovering her location, the Armenian authorities were notified in July of 2024, and as seen in this surveillance footage, they then suddenly showed up at her property before putting her in handcuffs. After 5 years on the run, Amy Betro, who by now was known as the so-called Hitwoman in a hijab, was finally in custody, and by January of 2025, she was escorted back to the UK to finally face trial. That trial would begin only a few months later, and the prosecution wasted no time on her. The evidence here was substantial. There was the surveillance footage, the forensics, the abandoned Mercedes, and the black glove with Amy's DNA found all over it. That same DNA matched the ammunition which was sent from the US, and her phone records sealed the deal. They also had her flight tickets, taxi records, and witness testimonies. Even the car salesman remembered her vividly, probably because she introduced herself as Becky Booth, while also wearing a hoodie and flip-flops. Despite the mountain of evidence, Amy spun an alternative reality. While taking the stand, she claimed that she was innocent and was simply in Birmingham to celebrate her birthday. Which, by the way, is the biggest lie of the century, because nobody goes to Birmingham to do that. According to her, the real assassin must have been another short, overweight American woman in the exact same trainers, who, by pure chance, was wandering around the same neighborhood at the same time. Unsurprisingly, the jury didn't buy it, and after 2 weeks of testimony and 21 hours of deliberation, the verdict was clear. Amy Betro was found guilty on all counts of conspiracy to murder, possession of a firearm with intent, and illegal importation of ammunition. She sat stone-faced throughout, offering no emotion whatsoever. From Wisconsin to Birmingham, back to Wisconsin, and then to Armenia, Amy tried everything to escape her fate. However, it seems that, in the end, even the best of agents are compromised.
One fascinating side note here is just how much modern technology helped crack this case wide open. I think I could probably ramble about this case for absolutely hours, but the bottom line here is simple. Amy Betro will go down as one of the dumbest criminals that we have ever covered. From her laughable disguises and fake name, right the way through to her literal Oscar-worthy performance, I think this entire story is screaming to be turned into a comedy. So Hollywood, off you go. Now, of course, we can't close this case without highlighting just how lucky Sikander was to survive that night, who had absolutely nothing to do with his father's feud. If he was to have died that night, this story would have been an absolute tragedy, but thankfully he survived, and hopefully he can now move on with his life.
This is just a side note that I found out after finishing the video, but it turns out that Sikander Ali is not actually that good of a person either. That's because only 12 months ago he actually was arrested and then found guilty of trying to sell more than 10 kilograms of cocaine on the market. He had also sold more than £560,000 worth of cocaine, the equivalent to $757,000 US. His gang was also intending to murder one of their rivals, and he was part of that operation. So it does look like he's actually no better than the rest after all.
So, what is the moral of the story here? Well, actually, I think it's quite simple. Crime does not pay, and in Amy's case, it doesn't even work. In the end, she didn't merely miss her shot, but missed the entire concept of being a criminal. Which is kind of ironic, because she quite literally has the word aim in her name. Anyway folks, I think that pretty much wraps up our case today. Thank you so much for making it this far, I really do appreciate you. And thanks again to ZocDoc for sponsoring today's video. Go to ZocDoc.com/coffeehousecrime to find and instantly book a top-rated in-network doctor today. You can also find the link in the description. Oh, and before you go, I would love to know what you think about this story, so as always, please share your thoughts and comments down below. And of course, if you'd like to see more Coffeehouse crime or simply more pictures of Nero, check out my other socials, most notably my Instagram. So yeah, I guess same time next week. But until that moment arrives, please do remember to look after yourselves and each other. And please also stay curious. Thank you, and goodbye.